Namaskar. Good morning, everyone. I am Dr. Anita Jain, Director at Usanas Foundation. It is indeed a moment of great pride and happiness to begin the second day of our Maharana Pratap Annual Geopolitical Dialogue 2023. On behalf of Usanas Foundation, I extend a warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, former Assistant Secretary General at United Nations and Deputy Executive Director at United Nations Women. Although she is not there, she will join us soon. I also welcome all the expert speakers of the today's session and participants at MPAGD 2023. Last year, MPAGD was on terrorism and it was a huge success. On our first day of the MPAGD, the 2023 great success with the insightful discussion on the changing world order, India's rule, neighborhood challenges, information war, and Indian foreign policy. With this short remark, I invite our founder and CEO, Mr. Pandya, for his opening remark. Mr. Pandya, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jain, for your welcome remarks. Yes, I'm Abhinav Pandya, the CEO of Usanas Foundation. Glad to be here on the second day of the Maharana Pratap Annual Geopolitics Dialogue 2023. And I would like to mention that yesterday we had amazing sessions and discussions on various themes like India's role in the changing world order, global expectations, and Indian perspectives. Then there were sessions on the information challenges that India is facing, evolution of Indian foreign policy, and we had some amazing speakers from across the world, from Israel, from Japan, from US. Today also we are going to have two very important sessions. The first one is on India's linkages with the West Asia, and in that definitely we look at the ancient ties, the cultural and historical ties, and the current geopolitical equations and the business and other engagements of India with the West Asia, because the region itself is very important, very critical to India. And personally, I believe that West Asia is India's pathway to find its role in the new and the changing world order. So therefore, we'll have a session dedicated to that, and our mentor, our advisory board member, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, will be chairing that session. We have some amazing speakers in that session from our friends from Saudi Arabia, our friends from Egypt, and Israel will be joining in the session. After that, we'll have another session on the war against terror. Terrorism has been India's major priority because India has been a victim of terrorism over the last 3-4 decades. In fact, it began in 1980s only, but from 1990 onwards, it became very serious and intense. And since then, India has faced this challenge in various proportions and intensities in the various parts of India, be it the left-wing extremism or the insurgents movements in the northeastern India or the Islamist separatist movement in Kashmir. Various terrorist groups sponsored by the Pakistan have been active, and they've been damaging India's national security and communal social harmony and challenging India's constitutional values of liberalism and freedom. But yes, India has come up in this war against terror, and the drive has been very successful. General Atta Hasnan will be chairing that session, and we'll have really great speakers in that session also. Some of the points which I found very interesting was your focus on the narrative war, and also you very, in a very upfront and a straightforward manner, you highlighted that some of the internal enemies, were trying to sabotage this whole mission of India and India's growth and development. It's very crucial and very important to deal with them, in whichever way it is possible, either to convince them, or if it requires some tough measures, then we also need them. Besides that, your idea on raising a popular movement, or to just raise a civic nationalism and to cultivate this will to grow and will to come out of this whole stranglehold and emerge as a global power, as a leader in the world. That is also very interesting, because that is something which is not confined to the government only. That is something which should be and which should come out from each and every citizen of India, and each and every part of the society, be it academics, be it the administrators, be it a common citizen, be it the business community. They have to play a very crucial role in India's forward march, particularly in this Amrit Kal. And yes, you are right, we'll have to take giant steps. We cannot go we can't be slow. This is a very crucial time for us, and we'll have to move fast and forward. So thank you very much, ma'am. And definitely, it's once again, I would say that it's an honor, it's a pleasure for us to have you on board and as a keynote speaker here. And now I'll invite our Chief Conference Coordinator and our Advisory Board member, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, to give his special remarks. And he is a pillar behind this conference. I must thank him.
Thank you, Avinav. Ma'am, Ambassador Lakshmipuri, my boss, and has been a mentor also as far as economic diplomacy is concerned from my early days in service. So I have always looked up to her. And today her address was, in my view, the most inspiring and the one which I have not heard anywhere with such comprehensiveness, in which nearly every dimension of what India is, what India can, and what India should, and what India should not do. Those are the things that are very difficult to put together. So complete policy landscape that she has laid out for India to become the great power that Prime Minister Modi is working on and India is aspiring for. I mean, we are looking by 2047 to become a developed country. The next generation will have it all for themselves, but they have to work very, very hard for it. There are great choices because very often there are small slips that take you down very much. We need to identify the challenges, especially the geopolitical challenges that are happening in the form of geoeconomics. There was a novel that was published about the world in 2034, and in which the author came out with a suggestion that by that time, perhaps US and China will have a war and India will emerge as the winner. Now, that is something that we need to keep in mind. It's a hypothesis, but that lady has been deployed by the Chinese as their pressure group company, the kind of PR company and in Washington, D.C., by the ambassador who is currently the foreign minister of China. So I think that there are a lot of things that are happening. India is growing very fast. But then we have to see that the recession in the rest of the world, which are our major markets, does not occur. That might have a dampening impact. So Atmanirbhar Bharat campaign that is happening with the partnership in which most of the countries are looking very positively at it. So that is something that will take us to make more comprehensive power in order to exercise. And of course, very often, as you know, it is very difficult for countries to project the power in a way that people understand it as benign. So that is extremely important. And when we see whether it is a bipolar world with once again a Cold War 2.0, which is a very big likelihood now, which we are seeing. But India has once again, in my view, and as I always say and hope that we have a possibility of being the third pole in a different way, as Madam Puri mentioned, through multi-alignments or the multipolar policy, unilaterals and others. But at the same time, leading the nations of a strategy for a strategic autonomy, because that is something that a very large number of countries in the world are willing to exercise. And they are looking for some kind of an anchor. And I think India can become that anchor. And I hope we do. So I once again, Madam, thank you so much for really your very inspirational speech. And there are a lot of young people here, and I'm quite sure they will be encouraged to follow the guidelines that it do. And in our case, in the Usanas, I think the Madam said about the strategic community and the thinkers. I think we need to work a little more on those dimensions and provide certain kind of recommendations and solutions that might be useful in a practical sense. Thank you.
Thank you. You are right. If I may just say something to also respond to what you said about India's rise being peaceful, benign, and beneficial for the world.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you. So I think now in about 5 minutes, we can start our first session for today. And Ambassador Anil Trigunayat will be the chairperson of the session. He's been the Indian ambassador to Libya, Malta, and Jordan. He's also the advisory board member of Usanas Foundation and the chief conference coordinator of MPAGD 2023. Sir, I'll invite you, and it's over to you. And we can start if you want to take yeah, sure.
No, do we have all the speakers?
Yes, I think has Dalia joined? Preeti, has Dalia joined?
We have Mr. Kamal.
Not yet.
We have Mr. Ansari. Yeah.
We can wait for Dalia.
And Professor Pasha, if somebody can give a ring to him.
Yes.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning. How are you, Mr. Kamal?
Thank you very much. Waiting for discussion.
Yes, we are looking forward to hear you. Well, to keep to the time, I think we can start 4 minutes earlier. That will give more time for discussion later on. So, friends, a very warm welcome to all of you for the conference. We are going to discuss the West Asia region and India's relations with it and how they have been transformed. But before I go further, I would like to express my heartfelt condolences and sympathies for the victims at this devastating earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and we hope that they have the resilience and the international support to overcome this tragedy. India has already provided as much assistance as possible for both the countries. Our teams are there working, and we hope that somehow these countries will get up and move forward. As far as, friends, West Asia is concerned, or Middle East as it is called by the Europeans and Americans, this is an umbilical kind of geography for us, for India. We have had historic civilizational connect with the region. We all know that the Dilmun civilization, the Egyptian civilization, they have had thousands of years of interaction, history, learning. And many of you also know that these were the Arabs who took the Indian long-standing and cultivated knowledge to the West and brought another integral dimension to our own together. You may also be aware that Islam came to India way before it went to many of the Arab nations. So India has not only because of the modern terms that we talk about, has a history, which is very proud history with the region, and has continued to move forward in order to enrich these ties even further. Now what we see is that if we can see the region, we say that it is, after the Arab Spring, has virtually been in a great churn. Like rest of the world, I mean, there is nothing new, but there are, of course, in my view, I say that this is driven by 5 or 6 R's, as I call them. There is generally a reaction, a very quick reaction to the things. People are very also emotional, and they get for the events. This also leads to often to reforms, which we are witnessing now in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in rest of the Gulf and the Arab countries. A lot is happening. Another good thing that we are seeing is that not only the rapprochement, reconciliation that is happening, which is a very good thing, because the region has to first learn to live by itself, along with one another. And if that happens, nothing is better for anybody, because it is an extremely important region in many ways, whether it is maritime lanes, trading lanes, whether it is for the energy security of the world, or even for food security, because fertilizer is a very essential part of the food security for the world. So therefore, I feel that there are so much that can happen. But then at the same time, we also witness in the region, not only that there is a intra-regional competition, there is a geopolitical competition, there is a geo-economic competition, and interreligious competition. That is also another thing that has been seen by various actors who wish to move forward in that direction. And some of these geopolitical realities can be seen, the contestations can be seen in the kind of hotspots in the Middle East, which are many there, whether it is Libya, whether it is Yemen, or you may talk of even today, even Lebanon, Syria, and many other parts. So there are, and these are seen they're displaying in a very difficult ways for the whole region and for the whole world in a way. And they have between themselves a certain kind of a dynamic which can impinge in a negative manner on the whole region. What happens in Iran, or Iran's rivalry with Israel, or Iran's rivalry with its other Arab neighbors, or what is happening with the Abraham Accords that we are seeing between Israel and certain Arab countries, a rapprochement, or we are seeing some kind of new organizations like I2U2, which are emerging, the West Asia Quad, as it is called. So all these new developments are taking place. But at the same time, so far, USA used to be the security arbiter of the region. But after its exit from Afghanistan and much greater focus on the Indo-Pacific, I think that there is a great perception in the region that US is perhaps withdrawing from it, or is not so much invested. One reason could be that it has become not only self-sufficient in hydrocarbons, but has also emerged as a competitor in the global market. It has also given rise to essentially other countries, major powers, to come in and try to exercise. And they are the ones like the China today is one of the major players. And we had a visit of President Xi Jinping very recently to Saudi Arabia. And before that, he had also signed some agreements about $400 billion and all with Iran. So China is expanding from Tehran to Tel Aviv, let us say. We can put it in this way. It has its own non-intrusion policy, non-interventionist policy in the region, essentially, but it's trying to create its own infrastructural periphery in the region through its relationships, which are currently economic or geo-economic, if you were to say, but it is very much invested in that as far as India is concerned, from that point of view. Of course, I know US competition is there. But Russia also, another country which has been part of the OPEC Plus, has been trying to come back into the region and has, especially after it stood up for Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and has prevented his essentially his dislodging from the region. So we are looking at a situation where we are finding that there is perhaps a certain wave of Arab Spring 2.0 moving, but at the same time, there is a greater understanding of the rapprochement, or the challenges of this transitional world order, which is going on, that more and more countries in the Middle East, especially in the Gulf, are working towards something as India very fondly calls strategic autonomy, or in their foreign policy choices. So we are witnessing that they are moving with a policy called Act East, going where their markets are, trying to more engage with their markets. That is natural in the current scenario. And I think that this is something that is going to move on. We will be hearing from others about the India-West Asia. So in another 5 minutes, I'll just try to touch upon what is happening in our relations with the region, basically, and the Gulf countries. You know, essentially India's, until very recently, despite the historical connect, despite everything, the relationship was quite transactional, were based essentially on 3 E's, which we call the economy, the energy, and the expatriate. So it was essentially in that dimension that we were looking at the relationship. It was just buying. And of course, the Pakistan factor, because of the Islamic connection. And very few people in the region ever knew that India was probably the second largest Muslim nation in the world. despite being a secular country. And that's something that has not been marketed well by India. I think we could have done that better. But then Pakistan benefited from that from the very beginning, whether in the OIC or otherwise. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, every country uses its whatever heft it has, strategic heft, it uses it, and it does. But we were taking it like it was sort of everything was with Pakistan. But I remember that since 2008, when I was working as Director General in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we had a visit of the then Prime Minister to Saudi Arabia, which was after a very long time. Can you imagine? We did not have a visit of an Indian Prime Minister since Prime Minister Indira Gandhi in 1982 to the region and to the UAE, which all happened. Everything changed once we had this present government led by Prime Minister Modi came, and they have made the Link West policy, frankly, into an Act West policy. So reason today we are seeing that Saudi Arabia is our fourth largest trading partner. UAE is our second largest trading partner. In terms of technology, in terms of defense, our collaboration is increasing with all the countries, especially with Israel, which has emerged as a very dependable partner as far as security dimension is concerned, as far as agricultural technologies are concerned. And with the Russia-Ukraine war, there is a greater incidence of our partnerships. And we are looking at a possibility where several countries together from the region and India could work together. Of course, India has grown as a major market. And as Ambassador Puri mentioned earlier, that this is the fifth largest economy with a tremendous opportunity, which could become the third largest in terms of purchasing power. Even today, it is the third largest, but it could become a substantive third largest economy by 2037. And today, India is the largest, most populous country in the world, beating China last month. So we have the opportunity, we have the human dividend, we have the demographic dividend, we have the digital capabilities, the economic soft power, which is driven by the modern technology, basically, so to say, like the knowledge power. So in that sense, and it is the largest democracy in the world, and it has acquired in its foreign policy the strategic autonomy, which means the voice of sanity. People may not agree, but that is what it is. Because at the end of the day, dialogue and diplomacy is very important. The foreign policy change, another one which came in India is, I would say, dehyphenation, which means that our relations with each country stand on their own. So that's why when Prime Minister Modi goes to Israel separately, he goes to Palestine separately. Our support for the Palestinian cause is there. It always stands. We are providing all kinds of assistance that is necessary. So today, relationship has moved with most countries in a strategic partnership, which means a greater incidence on security, cyber security, in defense, maritime domain. So we are working together in a far, far bigger way than we used to do with earlier. At the same time, India needs to, in my view, up the game and also have a regional approach. We have started doing sub-regional in the sense, if you say I2U2 as one of the examples, then it happens. Now we are discussing an FTA with the GCC. We signed with Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement in a record time with UAE. And that's something that has happened in recent past. I can tell you one thing, at one time, it used to be very, very difficult to get any person who's run away, fugitives from India, whether economic or the criminals from these countries, really impossible to get them back. But today our collaboration and counterterrorism and money against money laundering and all has increased to the extent that in record time we are able to get those people back. So investments are increasing both in the relationships by both sides, but at the same time by the other countries as well, looking at India as a great opportunity. And I think that P2P relations, of course, I don't talk, we have 9 million people who are remitting nearly $50-60 billion to India. Yeah, but of course, as countries in the region are diversifying from the hydrocarbons in a 30-40 time span, I think that the Indian labor or the workforce, which is most liked in the region, needs to be also reskilled, and they have to upgrade their skill sets in order to meet the requirements in these countries so that they can remain competitive and desirable as always. Because of the technology, a lot of things are going to change. And so much is happening in the region, I must say, which is beneficial for both sides, India and the Middle East. So I'll stop here, and I would like to now, the first person I would like to invite, I don't know if Miss Dalia Ziada, she has joined.
Yes, I'm
Miss
here.
Dalia,
Can you
good
see?
morning. Good
Yeah.
morning. Yes. So I would
Good
like to
morning,
request,
Ambassador.
Madam, welcome. Ms. Dalia Ziada, she is the chairperson of the Liberal Democracy Institute and the executive director of the Center for Middle East and East Mediterranean Studies. And she's, of course, an award-winning author, and I'm sure all of you must have heard about her. Madam, the floor is yours for about 15 minutes.
All right. So good morning, everyone. And I promise to stick to the 15 minutes. I will, of course, being an Egyptian citizen myself, I will focus on the growing relationship between India and Egypt, which I think has very much to do with what you've been just mentioning about the growing relationship between India and the entire Middle East, and perhaps also building a new strategic axis of some sort on the global south. As we know, the diplomatic relationship between Egypt and India has been stable for 75 years. However, the geographic distance and the many political complications inside both countries over the years have prevented them from growing the relationship, except maybe in one area, which is the international and bilateral trade. So, but actually right now what we are seeing is that it seems that the ongoing global transformations coupled with domestic changes in both countries in the past decades are creating a situation that will finally allow for this important relationship between Egypt and India to upgrade to deeper and perhaps unprecedented levels of cooperation that will further solidify the growing partnerships between West and East Asia in a way that could eventually shape a new strategic axis that could lead and guide the entire global south in the coming decades. And maybe I'm too optimistic here, but I'm sure it is a process now that has started and will take its time until we get to it. So to understand this inevitable development of the relationship between Egypt and India in particular, we have to look at the world order that is quickly shifting under the pressure of the Russia-Ukraine war. Because this is actually one of the main factors why this relationship development is accelerating these days more than we have expected in the past. Or, to put it in right words, it is accelerating under the pressure of the global standoff, let's say, between Western superpowers represented by the United States and Europe, and the Eastern superpowers represented by Russia and China mainly. The military mobilization and economic harms that each side is trying to inflict on the other is creating a situation very reminiscent of the international scene that we have seen in the 1960s and paved the way for the birth of the non-aligned movement. That is when most of the countries in the global south decided to separate themselves from the battle of the superpowers at the time in an attempt to end the global polarization and bring the world back to a point of balance, point of sanity. At that time, Egypt and India were among the key actors who founded this non-aligned movement and also encouraged their surroundings, either in Africa, the Middle East, or East Asia, to join in. I think history is already repeating itself right now and is encouraging Egypt and India to come closer again in an attempt to create a wider movement among the countries in their geographic surroundings that will take care of the future of and shape the destiny of the global south. So one of the most important factors encouraging this cooperation between Egypt and India is the issues that goes beyond on issues that goes beyond their immediate bilateral interests of diplomatic and economic cooperation, is that the visions of the political leaders in both countries are surprisingly complementing each other in a way that we have not seen before. And I'm here specifically speaking about the Egyptian President El-Sisi and the Indian Prime Minister Modi. So right now we are having like a very a lot of matching in terms with their visions regarding how to manage either foreign policy issues and also some internal issues in their domestic politics in both countries. On the foreign policy agenda, for example, the foreign policy visions that each of the two state leaders is currently adopting are very much matching. In India, the political leadership is looking westward meaning towards the West Asia side or towards its western borders or beyond its western borders towards Africa, towards the rest of the Middle East. In the past 2 years in particular, we have seen India taking strides to solidifying its relationship with important countries in West Asia, namely the Arab countries and even Israel, and also in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at Egypt, the Egyptian leadership is looking eastward. The new foreign policies that Egypt has been adopting for a few years now is enhancing its relationship with important countries beyond its eastern border, unlike the case before that Egypt was always looking at Europe and the United States as main partners. Now Egypt is looking towards India, China, Japan, and other countries on the eastern side of the globe to further cooperate with. And even recently, we started to see President El-Sisi reaching out to countries in Eurasia, which actually very new to Egyptian foreign policy. On the state ideology level, there is also a lot of similarities that's happening between the two states. Which is a very important factor to consider as well, because both leaders, Modi and El-Sisi, embrace a nationalist ideology that gives the priority to the cohesion of the nation state above all other concerns or other considerations. And that is the base upon which each of them is building their domestic and regional policies. And I think they can very much learn from each other's experiences, especially with dealing with some legally banned groups in both countries, like political Islamist groups, for example, which we had like a very tough experience with in Egypt. And now I think they are trying to find a place for themselves, a new place to emerge in India, by also causing a lot of trouble to the political stability there. So this is one area I think like this complementing state ideology alongside the foreign policy vision is a very important basis for the growing relationship between India and Egypt, which I think will also manifest into better forms or more intensive forms of cooperation in the future. That takes us actually to the point of looking at where the two countries are cooperating right now and how they can develop this in the future. I believe the two leaderships of Egypt and India are interested in standing together against two key threats: the economic crisis, which is hitting the wallet and particularly hitting our two countries, and also the threat of the political Islamists, which I was just mentioning. On the economic crisis issue, we all know that India has been a lifesaver for the Egyptian economy in the past year. The eruption of the Russia-Ukraine war in February of 2022 and the disruption of the supply chains exposed the Egyptian food security to a great threat because of the shortage in wheat supply. Egypt is among the top 5 importers of wheat worldwide. We used to import wheat with about 80% of our consumption of our annual consumption from Russia and Ukraine in particular. So you can imagine how the war really caused a big food problem in Egypt. However, in May 2021, Egypt knocked the doors of the Indian importers of wheat, who actually did not hesitate for a moment to immediately supply Egypt with its needs. And since then, we have India has exported more than 61,000 metric tons of wheat to Egypt so far, and still the flow is going. Aside from wheat, the economic cooperation between Egypt and India has been steadily growing over the years. In 2022, in particular, the trade volume between the two countries hit a record of $7 billion. This is a big number. Recent talks between the two countries are promising even to increase this trade volume, to $12 billion over the coming few years. Also, India is one of the prominent investors in Egypt with an investment portfolio of about $3.5 billion. Currently, there are 50 Indian companies in fields of agriculture, chemicals, and apparel that are operating in Egypt, and they are giving jobs to 38,000 Egyptians, 38,000 families, which is also another important point here, because actually recent talks between the two leaders and businessmen on both sides are promising that this volume of Indian investment in Egypt to increase to over $20 billion, which especially that the two countries are planning also to cooperate on issues related to oil and natural gas investments, which is also great and is actually promising a very important development in the future of cooperation between the two countries. On the defense level, actually this cannot be happening, like this economic cooperation cannot be happening without concurrently enhancing cooperation in the fields of security and defense. Egypt is interested in importing some of Indian-made weapons and military equipment and has already stated this interest. And both countries are obviously interested in military-to-military cooperation through joint military exercises. We have seen the Ministry of Defense of India visiting Egypt in the past few months. And we have also seen military exercises happening between India and Egypt, special forces for the first time ever. And we also have seen the Egyptian military and the Egyptian president invited to India's Republican Day celebrations recently, which is a big sign or a big gesture of friendship with Egypt that we actually are very much proud of here in Egypt. So all these actually bring us to the common domestic threat. It's both domestic and regional that the two countries are trying to fight against, both in their own way, but I think they can benefit from each other's experiences, which is the political Islamists. As we know, the Muslim Brotherhood has been wreaking havoc in the entire Middle East for decades. Egypt is one of the main countries that stood up against the group, alongside other countries in the Arab Gulf region, of course, like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. Now the Muslim Brotherhood are trying to find a new land for themselves in India, and ironically, they are using the exact same strategies that they have been using in Arab countries in the recent past to gain sympathy and mobilize the non-political bases of Muslim citizens. Islamophobia claims is, again, is the state leadership is one of these tools that the political Islamists are usually using. Like whenever the state is trying to control them because of their practices that are threatening to the nation state or the nationalist ideology of the state, they always come up with, okay, you are Islamophobic, you're working against us. They even accused leaders in countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, which counts as Muslim countries, of being Islamophobic. And unfortunately, many writers and think tanks in the West, especially in the United States, took this and even magnified this as, you know, and started to write about how Muslim leaders in Muslim countries are practicing Islamophobia simply because they are trying to control an illegal group that is abusing Islam, abusing the religion to make political gains that work in their favor. I believe the situation is even more complicated in India right now, given the fact that the current leader is not a Muslim leader, so he cannot like push away this accusation. It's, in other words, he's falling like not falling. I mean, he's. It's easy for them to accuse him of that, contrary to the truth. And on the other hand, India is having a huge Muslim population, about 204 million people are Muslims in India. This is, to put things into perspective, that is double the size of the entire Egyptian population and about 3 times the size of Egyptian Muslims. It's too big populations that can be easily manipulated by these political Islamist groups. And this is something of real concern. But the positive thing here is that India can learn from Egypt experience in that regard. And I think Egypt can share a lot of like best practices, expertise, or plans of action on how to deal with this situation that I think is very threatening to the Indian nation right now, to the unity and cohesion of the Indian nation, I mean, Indian nation state. So all these aspects are like the key points of cooperation that I think both countries are expected to build on in the coming period. So this is my presentation, and I look forward to the questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Dalia. This was amazing. I mean, you have very well encapsulated the relationship and the key areas in which we can collaborate. India and Egyptian relationship, as I said earlier, is over 5,000 years old. And this has been going on, and we are very happy and proud to have hosted President Sisi the 3rd time in India. He was here first time for the India-Africa Summit in 2015. Then he came on a bilateral visit, a state visit in 2016. And then recently as a special guest of honor at our Republic Day, which is conferred to very special friends. I would also like to say that India has, being the chair of G20, has invited Egypt to be part of the summit, and we will hope to see President Sisi again in September in India. Of course, as you know, during the Suez crisis that you had with the British in 56, India stood up with the Egyptians at the time, and since then has always believed in this maritime security. And you also mentioned, interestingly, the collaboration in oil and gas sector. And the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean is emerging, and Red Sea and the Horn of Africa are also new areas of contestation in the region that are emerging. And the kind of geopolitics that is coming out of in the region, I mean, we see, and this is my theory as a West Asia watcher, that perhaps we are looking at something, an emergence of a new block kind of thing, like which I call as CRIPTAQ, CRIPTAQ. So China, Russia, Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, Afghanistan, like that. So how it will emerge, but definitely the way things are moving, we could perhaps see a greater gelling among them as the Abraham Accord, the Sunni Arab countries align themselves to a great extent in a different ambit. You mentioned a very interesting thing, madam, about the Islamophobia accusations that are made, and you rightly brought out the figures of the Indians, Muslims here. I must say that in India, we have had the top leaders who have been Muslims, the presidents, the vice presidents, the army chief, navy chief, and air chiefs, intelligence chiefs. Our biggest missile man was the President Abdul Kalam. And of course, the top actors in India who are very popular in the Arab world are also Muslims. So in India, there is no this thing. And I'm very proud of our Muslims to the extent that despite what happened to ISIS, we had a very minuscule number of people, not more than 100, who went there. So there is, I think, a great quality of the Indian Muslims that they are not easily to be radicalized, irrespective of the kind of the philosophies that move around to radicalize for a certain cause. Of course, we have to be watchful. We have to be careful because radicalization of the youth is always dangerous for any country in the world. And everything has to be done to assimilate them into the main stream of the country. So I'll thank you once again for bringing out, and there'll be definitely some questions. I would like to invite our friend, Mr. Salim Ansari, who's been waiting since 6:30 in the morning in Saudi Arabia from Riyadh. And he is, of course, a known international relations strategic researcher and also a big Saudi businessman. Mr. Ansari, my friend, the floor is yours for 15 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And I would like to see if I can say it right. Ab Subhi Komira Paranam. Did I say it right, Mr. Ambassador? Amazing. So yeah, I would like first of all to thank Usanas Foundation and the Indian Ministry of External Affairs for co-hosting this panel. And in the spirit of the ancient Indian civilization's philosophy, which emphasizes the world as one family, I, from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the land of the two holy mosques, the birthplace of Islam, and the birthplace of the Islamic and Arab civilization, and the heart of the Arab and Muslim world, would like to extend my gratitude to the great Indian people for their constant contributions to humanity. And I vividly recall the shining smiles on the faces, coupled with the genuine hospitality of all of the Indian embassy delegates and guests 2 weeks ago, as we celebrated the 74th Republic Day of India in the cultural palace of Riyadh. So I would like to shed light a little bit on the historical aspects of the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the Arab world, and also with India. So tracing history back to the ancient relations, which dates back to more than 1,400 years, and I think it has provided an immense benefits for all of humanity in the fields of science, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and more. And one of the best examples of that is what we now refer to as the Arabic numbers, which the Arabs borrowed from the Indian civilization and developed and handed to Europe and the world at large. So Arab-Indian cooperation is further evidence that if we look back to the ancient incense trade route when Arab tribes in Mecca and other cities embarked on their caravans with goods coming mostly from India. So your country, Mr. Ambassador, has always been one of the goodness and blessings. And before the discovery of oil in Saudi Arabia, I remember my dad actually told me like a couple of years ago, he said before the discovery of oil, there was a colloquial phrase that our grandfathers used to say. They say, you can bet in India if life is unjust to you. You can bet in India if life is unjust to you. What does this mean? India is the land of opportunity, promise, and wealth. And it has always been a ingrained in the minds of the Arabs long time ago. So as we all know, psychologically speaking, superiority and inferiority complexes are kind of a part of a human nature. However, what I personally discovered about the Arab-Indian relationship is that throughout history, such complexes almost do not exist at all. Arabs have always felt a deep affinity to India and its people, to yeah, to an extent, even right now in current times, you can hear respected Arabic names in Saudi Arabia and many Arab countries, such as Hind, which is like many girls have the name Hind. Hind means Indian, and many boys are named Muhannad, which also means Indian. So our Arabic language borrowed also some Hindi Sanskrit words, so many ones, including ones that are actually mentioned in the Holy Quran, such as ginger and other words. So our deep respect for India transcends all areas of Arab life, where you can even find in ancient poetry and literature variety of references to the pride an Arab feels when wielding an Indian sword. So there is also beautiful. This is definitely like a beautiful historical relations between the Arabs and India, which I think continues into the present time, as both nations have realized that it is important to enhance their bilateral relationship in light of the emerging multipolar world. And I believe that a promising future lies ahead of us. As you may remember, His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, referred to Prime Minister Narendra Modi as his elder brother. So the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman said to Modi and referred to him as his elder brother. So this deep relationship can show you that the future ahead of us is really promising. So their relationship exemplifies the entire Arab-Indian relationship, and we are all brothers and sisters. So, and culturally speaking, we are both. These are some of the commonalities between the Arabs in general, not only Saudis, and the Indians. We are both considered to be collectivistic societies, as opposed to individualistic ones. And collectivistic societies founded on the values of family, respect for elders, and hospitality. And a point worth mentioning is that Indians are actually considered to be the largest minority in Saudi Arabia right now, at over 2.5 million people. And I've heard that, Mr. Ambassador, that your daughter is actually residing in Saudi. That's true?
Yes,
Amazing.
that's true.
Yeah. In
Not a
exploring,
problem.
as if I didn't just hear it from you. In exploring opportunities, I think our cooperation has paved the way for significant advances. And a prime example of that is the success we have seen with the economic reforms that are moving Saudi Arabia beyond a strictly oil-based economy toward economic diversification. So these efforts have been so successful that Saudi Arabia ranked first among G20 countries for digital competitiveness, and second after Japan for cybersecurity. And in overcoming challenges, arguably the most critical challenges that both of our nations face are absolutely the threats of extremism and terrorism, as Dr. Dalia has just mentioned, and specifically those which extremism that are opposed by the radical Muslim Brotherhood group, a group, might I add, that has nothing to do with neither Islam nor Brotherhood. So nonetheless, I think when we are faced with a threat, we rise to the occasion. And Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have transformed Riyadh into the epicenter and capital of global efforts to combat terrorism, forming mostly three organizations, international ones. The first is the Islamic Military Alliance Against Terrorism. The second is the Global Center for Combating Extremist Ideologies, which is called I'tidal. and also the Ideological Warfare Center, IWC. And also, let's not forget the eminence of the Muslim World League and Secretary General Dr. Muhammad Al-Isa in promoting peace, tolerance, and unity among not only the Muslim nations, but the whole world. In fact, Saudi Arabia is so committed to global peace that it even emerged as the first global donor of official development assistance in 2022. And we have that's definitely based on the GNI. We have seen a significant growth when it comes to the economic relations between India and Saudi Arabia. I think we have seen a significant growth in the trade of our two nations. And according to media sources, I think the volume of trade exchange between the kingdom and India recorded a growth close to 91% in 2022. And comparing it to the last decade. So we are seeing a huge cooperation in the field of trade. And Saudi Arabia, for the last 4 years, they have invested more than $120 billion inside India. And the exchange volume between the two countries exceeds $27 billion. And yeah, so I think the future is really promising in this changing world right now. Saudi Arabia needs India and India needs Saudi Arabia. Both nations can complement each other in such a manner that can build a foundation for their relationship that can keep the peace in both nations and in both regions as well. So back to you.
Thank you, Shukran, Habibi. It was really amazing the way you put it together. The relationship, of course, we keep following about the Vision 2030, and I had opportunity of traveling to your country several times. The last one was in 2019 when we went for a think tank discussions, and one could feel that the reform is so much in the offing, and was so much needed also. You know, at the end of the day, the progress and development is very, very important for any country. And we need to move out of the shackles that do that. And we see, and you mentioned that something which I did not know right now, about that among the G20 countries, in the digital competitiveness, you're number one. I mean, congratulations. That's something really great. Of course, the biggest challenge for the world is today, in my view, the two which are, of course, completely sidelined in the international discourse, and that is about the climate change. And we appreciate your green initiative, which has been MBS had launched it, which is extremely good. And the second, of course, is terrorism and radicalization, which is once again rising across in different garbs. And we all need to fight with this. And a global fight against terrorism is a must. We cannot have good terrorists, bad terrorists, my terrorist, your terrorist. A terrorist is a terrorist at the end of the day. There are ways when we have Mahatma Gandhi in our country, we won our freedom against the most powerful empire against through nonviolence. And we helped all our Arab country friends also in their quest for freedom after that. So I think that we need to look at a possibility, because the world has to be together. But it's amazing, and thank you so much for your this. I'm sure we're going to get back to you with some questions, exactly what's happening there. Now I'd like to invite my friend, Dr. Professor Aftab Kamal Pasha. He is the director and professor at the Center of West Asian Studies at JNU until recently. And he's also a member of the Gulf Research Center, an author of great repute, one of the finest minds on West Asia and the Middle East. Professor Pasha, my friend, where are you now? Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Alan.
Alan O'Sullivan, Ambassador Anil, and my distinguished colleagues from Egypt, Dr. Dalia, and hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, please, go ahead.
The video seemed to have gone.
Maybe you Yeah, it's
Yes.
come back.
The distinguished speakers from Egypt and from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Salman Al-Ansari. I don't know what's happening to this video. Okay. You see, in the few minutes I have, let me just broadly outline the main issues which link India with this important ancient region with which India and the people in broader West Asia and North Africa have been in continuous contact with each other through a variety of means. Whether it is our relationship with Egypt during the Pharaonic period, or with Mesopotamia, or with the Magan civilization in Oman, or the Dilmun civilization in eastern Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, or the Assyrian, Yemeni, and various other old civilizations in this region. Indians have contacted all of these people through maritime, through land borders, and in continuous touch. They have shared Indian achievements, and they have also absorbed the achievements from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from the other civilizations which flourished. Despite wars, invasions, whether internal or regional, whether it is Alexander or the Romans or the others invading this part of the region, one thing which has been constant has been the sharing of knowledge and the cultural links, the religious bonds, whether the arrival of Jews from this Palestine region or West Asian region to the coast of India, or the arrival of Christians to the Indian coast, or the Muslim saints and ulamas from that part of the region, or Indian philosophers going to Alexandria to interact with Greeks who were occupying Alexandria then, or the Buddhist scholars who went to different centers where Buddhism flourished. So despite the wars, despite the interventions by neighboring empires, rulers, the people-to-people contact has been constant. That is a very important point to note. Despite political upheavals, despite all that was done to disconnect them, the people have found ways and means to reach out to each other. This shows the enduring bond which has come to exist over a long period of time through Islam, through Christianity, through Judaism, through paganism, and so on and so forth. And that's a reflection of what we have at this present moment. If West Asia is important for Indians, it is not just for the energy security or the workers or trade or investment, etc., but it is the human feelings. If you go to any Indian city, people are familiar with Egypt. The people are familiar with Nile, with Nasser, with Sadat, Mubarak, and everything Egypt stands for, pyramids and so on and so forth. So is the case when I was there in Egypt for 4 years as Mudir Markaz Sakaf Hindi. I went to all the 25 governorates from Al Arish to Aswan, and from Siwa to Hurghada. I found people familiar with India, not only those who had studied in India and got degrees, but also common people through films, through various other contacts. They were familiar. And the most important thing they wanted was just to feel and meet and shake hand and touch the artists and singers, musicians who came from India. They could not believe they had to touch physically the dancers or the people, shake hand with them to feel that, yes, you have come all the way from India. So that was the kind of bond I noticed in not just in Egypt, but throughout this region. That is very important. that brings us to the present moment of contemporary relations, of how easily we have bonded after colonialism ended its role in Egypt and India and many other parts of the Arab world. It was a natural bond between India and these people, whether they are Arabs or Iranians or Turks or even the Jews, who have been held in high respect in India, because there was no discrimination of any kind for any Jew, whether he is a Yemeni Jew or Baghdadi Jew or from Palestine or from Iran or any. They settled and traded with India and this part of the region. In fact, there were the links, important links from Cairo to Aden to Muscat to Kerala or to Baghdad or Basra. Important Jewish families traded and they provided the link, just as the Bohras now are the link between India, Egypt, and Europe. The third point is, of course, after independence, our bond got strengthened between Nehru and Nasser. The Suez Canal was mentioned. But somewhere the Cold War impacted, and the root cause of the problems in this region, that is the Arab-Israeli conflict inflicted by the British and sustained by other interested powers, that has become a source of insecurity in this region. We try to help the Palestinians in the partition time in 47, but that was a minority plan. It did not succeed, but somehow the world has been struggling to solve this problem, including President Nasser and Sadat's effort to sign the Camp David and have peace with Israel. But the Israeli determination to colonize the Palestinian land and deny the Palestinians their rights, legitimate rights for a state of their own, still is yet to be achieved. The contemporary relations, of course, are important and growing. Economic interaction, and I think no war can stop the growth in this. More areas are being identified, whether it is defense or space cooperation or cyber security, and including terrorism and so on and so forth. But from my point of view, Egypt is important. I have always emphasized in my interaction with the Ministry of External Affairs the centrality of Egypt in our foreign policy towards this region. Egypt may not have the oil resources like Saudi Arabia, UAE, but the human resources which Egypt has is a thinking power. What the Egyptians think about their neighbors, their Arab partners, is going to be reflected in the foreign policies of these states in the coming years. So what Egypt thinks, we have to follow closely, because they know the region, the pulse of the Arab people who live in their neighborhood. The Egyptians understands much better than any other people. So that is how we have to coordinate our policies and understand better this region through Egypt, not because Arab League is located in Cairo or because large number of Egyptians work in different Arab countries, but because of the uniqueness of Egypt's history, culture, their absorbing of ideas from other areas. They see the sparks, the signals from other countries much faster than any other power. So Egyptian outlook, how they see the issues, gives us a clue to how we can plan and look at this region from our perspective. The point about food security of India and Egypt is important, because until Camp David, Egypt was almost self-sufficient in wheat and food grains. But Sadat was told, it is Ford Foundation and others, they told the Egyptian leader that it is better to grow fruits and vegetables and flowers and export them and get foreign exchange. With the result, all the rich agriculture area, which was producing wheat and which made Egypt self-sufficient, was lost to this. Neither it was exported nor foreign exchange came, because it was consumed mostly internally. So that's how Egypt became dependent on other countries, earlier on Argentina, America, now Ukraine and Russia. But India and Egypt have been sharing their agricultural practices. I think maybe it will be useful for more interaction. But from Indian perspective, it is extremely important for our food security because we don't have enough gas, natural gas. Egypt has not only inside but also in the shores in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that is an important component for the production of chemical fertilizers. Two private sector based plants are already in Egypt working, and we buy back 100%. So it also has rock phosphate, and that is an important input for chemical fertilizer. So more plants can be set up, and that will help India's food security, and in turn export food grains to Egypt in that way. So apart from trade and investment and non-alignment and defense and space and software, cyber security and all, food security also, India's food security, Egypt is extremely important, which not many people would like to flag because they think India is self-sufficient and exporting. But to produce this grains of nearly 300 million tons every year, for not only 1.4 billion population, but also to export, we need chemical fertilizers. And that is where Egypt can play a very vital role in safeguarding its supplies to India and our food security. Like we have established plants in Oman and various other countries where bulk of the chemical fertilizer is imported. You see, the issue of extremism and terrorism is, of course, a major concern of most rulers in this region, whether it is Egypt or Saudi Arabia or Israel or other things. I was a bit surprised when Dr. Dalia mentioned the Indian Muslim population repeatedly as being very high and over 200 million. Of course, it is a fact. You don't have to be worried about the numbers, that it is 3 times the Egyptian population. Is a South Asian Muslim population has been much bigger, but for the partition into Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. Otherwise, it would have been more than 500 to 600 million. But what is interesting is, you see, Ikhwan al-Muslimin, you said, is trying to make inroads into India. You see, Ikhwan, I don't have to remind you, originated in your country, in Egypt. Hassan al-Banna was Egyptian. Morsi was Egyptian. Said Qutb was Egyptian. Jamal Abdul Nasser tried to crush. He did not succeed. Then Sadat made peace with them. Then Mubarak also tried to crush them. You see, successive rulers in Egypt have tried to crush Ikhwan al-Muslimin, but it has not been possible to eliminate because it has roots, deep roots in every village of Egypt. Every Egyptian would like to be a good Muslim and a good Egyptian. So they like to see policies which reflect the aspirations of the Egyptian people. Egyptians are not pharaonic before Islam. They have accepted Islam, they have accepted Arabic, they have accepted Arabic culture. So that should be reflected in the ruling, in the power, and the policies which the governments pursue, and not to cater to the Americans or the Europeans or Israelis or any such thing. It should reflect the aspirations of the people, just as the Turks wanted to be different, not what Mustafa Kemal wanted to thrust secularism. So that's how Erdogan is in power for more than 20 years, because the people feel that what they are living in day-to-day basis, that should be reflected in the policies. Just as in India also, there is a growing aspiration to support BJP because they feel that this is what their government stands for. So every people desire and aspire that their government should reflect what the people should be there. So even in until recently, extremism was identified with Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, and that was identified as a source of instability in many other parts of the world, including India. We were worried about extremist groups, whether it is Ikhwan or Wahhabi or Salafi or various other groups trying to encroach on Indian Muslim population, because we live in a secular country. We respect all religions and all communities, irrespective of their creed, their faith, their caste. So in that way, extremism has to be controlled in your country first, whether it is Egypt or Saudi Arabia or in other parts, And my own reading is that the greatest source of instability, extremism, is the non-resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. All the British prime ministers, foreign ministers have spoken that the greatest source of instability in this region is the non-resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict, because that injustice to the Palestinian is breeding extremism, and that is taking a religious color. So until the root cause of this instability and extremism is addressed, you cannot point that extremism is making inroads in India or in any other country. So your
Yes,
region has to
Dr.
see.
Pasha,
Yeah,
1 minute, please.
give
1
me
minute, please.
two more
Yeah.
minutes. So in
Yeah.
that way, as the British Foreign Secretary during John Major's time pointed out, the instability, terrorism, extremism, and other issues of violence can be traced to the non-resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict. So in that way, it has to be seen that the Palestinians get justice and that the issue is resolved. And then we can ensure peace and security and stability, which is the primary goal of India and Egypt and Saudi Arabia and other countries. We would love to have more peace and more trade and more workers, more investments and joint cooperation, so that we can develop the strong points we have, whether it is software technology, ICT, cybersecurity, or human resources development, or educational and cultural fields which need to be promoted and progress made in these kind areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pasha, for your very insightful and, as usual, the professorial uh, uh, statements that you have made about various issues. And most importantly, you connected with various civilizations of the Arab world with India and how they interacted. Interestingly, you brought out a point about the Jews being linked with various countries. And as India is the only country where there has never been any anti-Semitic for hundreds and thousands of years feeling, and they have successfully done it here, and then they moved about 80,000 of them to Israel. And they still maintain very close connections with India. Of course, the Palestinian issue is very important. It needs to be resolved. And I think it is a core issue for the region, despite the fact that the preferences of various regional powers have moved on, and there might be a certain fatigue there. Of course, you spoke a great deal on Egypt, which added to what Dr. Dalia said, and that has the new areas in which we can work. And you mentioned about the food and fertilizer security between India and this. They are intricately linked between the several Arab countries. I was in Jordan, and we had a plant like you mentioned about in Oman. That was the first fertilizer plant that we did in Oman. And like with Egypt, we are buying a lot of rock phosphates and others. Gas and other areas are going to be there. But of course, the most important thing, as you mentioned, was the P2P connect. That is the real strength of our relationship with each of the countries in the region. Now, thank you so much. And now I would like to, not last but least, but Professor Dr. Ali Kharmon, who is a very well-known expert and a senior research scholar at the International Institute for Counterterrorism and a former senior research fellow at the Institute for Policy and Strategy at Reichman University. He has served as an advisor to Israeli Ministry of Defense and Israeli Government Secretariat. Dr. Kharmon, floor is yours for next 15 minutes, please.
Good morning again to the panelists, to you, Mr. Ambassador, and to all the public which is present. I'd like to thank you very much to give me the opportunity to participate at this important conference. Also, the opportunity to have this dialogue and exchange of views with my Arab colleagues. I'd like in a very short period of time that I have the 15 minutes to look a bit more from the strategic point of view of what happens today in the region and the challenges and the threats, I think, that we'll have to face really in the next year or two. Since the Israeli-Indian relations began officially in 30 years ago, India had also always need to balance, I would say, between the Arab world and the interest of their relationship or its relationship with Israel itself. So for a very long period of time, India has succeeded in, on the one way, to improve the relationship with Israel, but to keep very good relations also with the Arab world. Ironically, I would say, the last 4 or 5 years, India has to balance between the Arab world, Israel, and Iran, because Iran has become a direct enemy and threat to, first of all, the Gulf countries, but also practically to all the Arab countries. We see its a very negative role in Syria, in Lebanon, and especially in Yemen lately, which is threatening, by the way, directly Saudi Arabia and Emirates' interest, including missile firing on these countries. But as you said already, and I think you pointed to the main developments in our region, the Abraham Accords have succeeded in providing a forum that improves not only the relationship between Israel and most of the Arab countries, moderate Arab countries, but also with India. And the Quad, the new Quad, which is the I2U2 Quad, is involving not only Israel and India, but also the Emirates and the United States, which is a very important development also not only on the economic side, but also on the strategic side. For instance, this has permitted India to replace China in a very important project, strategic project in the Haifa harbor in Israel itself. I think that also this has permitted India to improve the relationship with the Gulf countries, with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. I think the last 2-3 years, the visit that Prime Minister Modi has done in Saudi Arabia and the visit of embassy in India itself, and this without provoking any conflict with the Israeli side, but mostly I think with the Iranian side. Again, because Iran has become a threat, a regional threat, and a regional threat for stability of most of the countries. But I would like to present this situation in the light of the two conflicts that we are testifying today. First of all, the war in Ukraine, which is a huge conflict in Europe itself, with the threat of a third world war, because Russia is threatening not only Ukraine, but it's threatening practically all the Eastern Europe countries, which the Soviet Union has in the time occupied, and practically they were part of the Soviet Empire, or the Communist Empire, if you want, and they threaten already not only to attack NATO countries, but also to use nuclear weapons, which is a very serious development. And the second one is the Chinese threat to Taiwan. By the way, Mrs. Ziada mentioned the southern globe, but the Chinese, for instance, the Chinese threat to Taiwan is threatening not only interest of I would say the strategic allies of the United States like Japan and South Korea, but practically it threatens all the southern hemisphere in this part of the world. India, first of all, but also the Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, and so on. So we have a situation in which there is a huge instability, and we see that India, for the moment at least, has tried and has succeeded for the moment to balance between its interest in the two camps, especially in the war in Ukraine, by not, I would say, condemning too strongly the Russian aggression. And here again, we see the influence of Iran. The last year, Iran has become a military ally of Russia, and it is using its very important missile and drone industry to support the Russian army in its attacks against civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So this provokes, I think, a kind of pressure on India because the more the war will continue and will threaten the heart of Europe, because we see that now even France and Germany and other countries, including the Scandinavian countries, are ready to provide a very heavy armament to Ukraine. This will clearly enhance the stability of other regions. So it will be interesting to see how the Indian strategy will try to mitigate not only the threats but also the interests, direct interests of India itself. And by the way, Israel has the same problem because of the Russian presence in Syria. Because of the big Jewish community in Russia and in Ukraine. So we have perhaps the need to see how to coordinate or how to try to understand this very unstable and threatening situation. So the issue, for instance, the balance today, as I said, is not to balance from the Indian point of view between the Arab countries and Israel, but between the alliance of Arab countries and the threat of Iran. I understand that lately there is perhaps less enthusiasm in India and perhaps even in Iran concerning the harbor that is very important for Charabad, I think it's its name, which is very important strategically, but it is also a liability in case it is threatening other interests in the region. By the way, I want to mention the very interesting change in the Chinese policy. During the last visit several months ago of President Xi to Saudi Arabia, for the first time, and in spite of the promise to invest $450 billion in Iran, President Xi made very critical remarks about Iranian role in the instability in the region. I think here India should consider this issue and to try to understand what is the change, if there is a change. In my opinion, there is a change in Chinese strategy vis-a-vis the Middle East, because there is not only the economic, until lately China looked to the Middle East mainly economically. For instance, China could be the only country that can reconstruct Syria. No other country has the means to do it. Clearly, even the Gulf countries don't have perhaps the means to do it compared with China. And we see that China has now a representative, special representative for issues in the Middle East. In this way, I think China is perhaps a concurrent of India in the Middle East. And the policy of China in the Middle East should be a very important issue in India's strategy. I would want to mention a very, perhaps, I would say, minor incident lately that still shows how the complexity and the sensitivity of Indian strategy in the Middle East and in the what you call West Asia. For instance, I think India, together with Syria, has produced very strong criticism of Azerbaijan in its conflict with Iran, because of the Azerbaijani place of attack of its embassy in Tehran. And this again puts perhaps India in a situation where it is supporting Iran in an issue which is not only against the interest of Azerbaijan, but we must take in consideration also the interest of the United States, of Turkey, by the way, which nobody has mentioned, but it's a very important player also in the Middle East, and even Israel, which today is a very important ally of Azerbaijan. And lastly, on the issue of the threats and the challenges is the nuclearization of Iran. And Iran is running to nuclear weapons. It is quite clear. There is no probably no solution for the new accord or a new agreement between the great powers, especially the United States, Europe, and Iran on this issue. So we'll see in the next year or two the possibility of a military conflict with Iran. And clearly Israel is directly involved, but we saw lately a huge military drill between United States and Israel, and this clearly is a message, I think, to the Tehran regime that they have to think how to deal with the militarization of their nuclear program. So I think that the challenges that we are seeing ahead, and I say India, the Arab countries, and Israel are very, very serious. And in this, unfortunately, in this scenario, Russia, together with Iran and China, are the main threats for a real, perhaps, world conflict. So everybody has to think and to try to understand what are the threats and how to deal in order to mitigate, to minimize them, and not to arrive to the situation in which there will be a huge conflagration. If I have several minutes more, I'd like to...
You'll have some questions afterwards.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to, first of all, to thank Kamal Pasha, Mr. Kamal Pasha, for his words about the Jewish community. Indeed, the Jewish community in India is a very old community. It is a relatively new community in Israel itself because there was immigration from this community. And the fact that we see that the Muslim population, on the one hand, a huge Muslim population in India, and also the Jewish population can survive and have a normal life without conflict in the Indian society and Indian state, I think it's a huge positive sign of importance of India, not only as a but already a huge power, world power, but also a moral power, and which respects values and which are, I would say, humanitarian values and universal values. So I will relate perhaps to the issue of terrorism and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict later if there will be time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karman, for those considered remarks. We understand the Israeli position with regard to Iran or the Saudi position of the other Arab countries. But the fact remains is that there are regional issues. There are efforts at the moment that are also going on in the region between the Saudis, between the Israelis, UAE and Iran, between the Saudis and Iranians, through the Iraqi mediation. So they are trying to find a modus vivendi in the changing world. That is, I think, in my view, the most important. And what's India has always propagated a dialogue and diplomacy and not a resort to any force to settle the disputes. For the last 3-4 days, I have been talking to several Israeli think tanks and the people here in India. The big delegation is here from Israel, and we've been discussing about various issues. As far as India-Iran relations are concerned, they're historic. They're civilizational relations. I know it is not, as was mentioned by Professor Pasha also, it is also a P2P relationship. And strategically, from India's point of view, Iran has been important. not only as a bilateral partner, but also for its connectivity to Central Asia as well as to Afghanistan. Chabahar Port has provided an alternate strategic choice for India, which India is going ahead with. And the Americans and everybody else understands that. So India's relationship, as you mentioned earlier also, that our relationship with each country stands on its own merits, on its own bilateral interests, are not necessarily from the prism of any third country. Exactly. We do understand that there are problems we have. I mean, for example, you mentioned about China. I don't personally think that China has changed any policy towards Iran. It may look like that because President Xi Jinping was in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh and had a Gulf summit and the Arab summit and a bilateral summit and said what was necessary to be said. But that does not mean that it has. So from my perspective, I mean, I don't know about the government of India's, but I think that there is no real change. Iran has a role to play, but Iran, if it is threatening its neighbors, it needs to mend its ways. It needs to learn to have a modus vivendi. There has to be certain kind of a security architecture which should be acceptable to everyone. I mean, currently, the current Iranian regime and the Israelis, they are in an existential threat of one another. And there is a constant threat for whatever reasons. We know the historic reasons for that, which have happened. There are a lot of Jews also still living in Iran, I think. But I think that the JCPO, Iranian nuclearization, or the nuclear threats, whether by Russia or by anybody else, is going to dislodge the world completely. And if anything happens in our part of the world, I mean, Russia-Ukraine war is still a limited conflict to some extent with global implications. But if something happens in our region, that will completely conflagrate the whole place. So the only end to it cannot be by war. It has to be by containment of those negative influences coming out of a country. Thank you so much for all your great inputs and comments. There is one question which I had in this, and that was if Salman Ansari is still here, and Dr. Dalia is also here. And this question is from Shivam Rajput. And Dr. Dalia, you may also respond to what Professor Pasha had said if you wish to. And the question, because we have to finish in 8 minutes, 7 minutes, next panel is already here. So it says that the money to Islamic radical groups is routed through Middle Eastern countries. What can Saudi Arabia, UAE, or other countries do to restrict the money flow, or are doing?
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's great presentations. I've learned a lot of great things from all of you. I would like to quickly respond first to Professor Kamal Pasha. He made some wonderful remarks about based on his experience in Egypt, which are mostly true, actually very true, all of what he said, except that this point about maybe the Muslim Brotherhood. Yes, that's true. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded and they started in Egypt, but they have also been overthrown by the Egyptian people in 2013 when the people realized that they built their legacy on the premises of manipulating people's religious piety. So although, of course, the majority of the Egyptian population are religious, either Muslims or non-Muslims, by the way, religion plays a very important role in the lives of Egyptians of all religious backgrounds, and this should definitely be represented in social and political activities. But when there is a group that is saying very clearly that they are against the concept of the national state again, or the nation state, and they want to destroy the nation state system to establish their own caliphate system that's very radical and very extremist, that is exactly what most of the people in Egypt stood against and said, like, enough for that. And I hope other people in other countries worldwide will also continue to stand up against this radical manipulation, or this political manipulation of Islam and the religious piety of the people. Regarding the very interesting question of the funding of terrorist organizations, I think maybe yeah, Mr. Salman can answer this better than me because he's very involved in this issue. But very quickly, I will say that there is like no specific country that is that can be accused of like funding this organization, but there are individuals, unfortunately, who are very powerful in certain countries, either powerful politically or financially, who still embrace this radical ideology and still wish to see these groups flourishing in different extremist groups, I mean, flourishing in different places in the world because they eventually serve their interests. So I think by targeting the individuals rather than targeting like the states or the countries will be more effective.
Thank you. Mr. Salman.
Sure, it's a good question. With regards to the funding of terrorism, definitely it's a global challenge. And I think the one who asked the question had the information of the last decade or the two last decades. Why? Because right now I can actually say it clearly that there was no one single article either in the East or the West in any media organization that is respected that has been speaking lately about Egypt or Saudi Arabia being funders of terrorism. Why? Because these two countries specifically are the two wings of the national security of the Arab nations, as President Sisi has mentioned, are actually on the attack mode, not on the defense mode. On the attack mode, even in the narrative itself, by actually encouraging Western nations to not allow Muslim Brotherhood sympathizers to change their policies or to radicalize the youth. And that's why I mentioned the three organizations that have been established by Saudi Arabia to combat terrorism, either electronically or ideologically or militarily. So I think this is something of the past right now. Yes, before definitely we had a lot of challenges with regards to having individuals to funnel or channel money here and there, etc. But right now we have complete governance. We have zero tolerance with terrorism. And that's what we actually working on, encouraging our Western partners to follow suit, because terrorism is a global phenomena and it affects everyone in the whole world.
Thank you, Mr. Salman. Thank you very much. And it's very hopeful now. We end on a good note, and let's hope that the West Asia and India continue to prosper together. There is peace and security in the region. I would like to thank each one of you for your very profound comments. And thank you so much. And we are going to meet again, inshallah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Shukriya. Shukriya.
Shukriya. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat, sir, for this amazing moderation and a wonderful session. I would also like to thank all our esteemed panelists, Salman Al-Ansari Sahab, Dalia ji, and Dr. Ali Karman and Dr. Pasha.